Okay, welcome everyone to our SNATS chat for spring 2020. Many of you know NATS has had great success with their NATS chats for years, and they've been especially helpful over these past several weeks with numerous special topics on how we can cope with everything that's going on right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything from dealing with the technology associated to teaching through distance learning to how to healthily cope with the new demands on us as singers and teachers and performers and human beings. And we're so lucky to have this forum, the SNATS chat forum, to kind of build on that success of the NATS chats and aim it to an audience specifically of college students and early career professionals. So we're kind of aiming similar topics as the NATS chats to that very specific audience. And it's a real joy to get to moderate and facilitate these chats. You probably know if you're watching, but we do these SNATS chats twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. And if you have not seen our other SNATS chats, you can check those out on the SNATS area of the NATS website. So go check that out, and all of our archive chats are there. If you have ideas for topics for future SNATS chats, I'm going to put my email address here in the chat window. It's my first name.lastname.baritone@gmail.com. So that's eric.hood.baritone@gmail.com. So send me your ideas if you think there's a guest who would be great or a topic we should cover, or any ideas you have at all. Just go ahead and send those to me and we will work them into our rotating schedule. The way this evening is going to work is I'm going to introduce our special guest. And she will begin our presentation on our topic today, which is maintaining creativity, compassion, and connection during the COVID-19 pandemic. Oftentimes, our presenter will have kind of a slide deck, and they'll take us through a kind of formal presentation, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A session. But Stacy wants this to be a little bit more of a conversation, which I think is fantastic. So if you have questions, comments, or ideas that occur to you while we're beginning this conversation, you can go ahead and ask those as we continue. So 2 ways you can ask your questions or can contribute to the conversation. The first is you can submit a question in writing on the questions box on your dashboard, or you can put it in the chat, and I will see that and read it to our guest. Or you can virtually raise your hand, and I'll unmute you and you can ask Stacy yourself. And I have a feeling Stacy's going to invite some participation. So if you're one of those who usually kind of participates on mute and just watches, I think you might be asked to participate, which I think is fantastic. So be ready for that. Let's see, nope, no one ran scared yet, Stacy, so that's good. That announcement did not horrify anyone yet. So like I said, you can raise your hand to ask the question yourself or submit the question to me in the chat or questions box. So with all of those logistics kind of out of the way, it's my privilege to introduce our guest this evening, Dr. Stacy Gerberich. I'm going to do a little bit of bio for you, Stacy, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Stacy is a psychology resident who joined USU Counseling and Psychological Services in the fall of 2019. So she's here in Logan, Utah with me at Utah State University. She's the liaison to the Utah State University Kane College of the Arts. Her clinical background includes a postdoctoral fellowship at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and she completed her predoctoral internship at the University of Rochester with a concentration at the Eastman School of Music. Stacy's passionate about opportunities to collaborate with students, staff, and faculty in order to create a culture of holistic wellness at the Kane College of the Arts at Utah State University. Stacy earned her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from Wheaton College near Chicago in 2018, and her bachelor's degree is from Messiah College in Pennsylvania. Stacy, welcome. I'm so excited. You know, I get to chat with all kinds of professionals in the singing and voice teaching and peripherally related realms all the time, and it's super exciting. But when I get to bring a guest in that I know personally and who I've had the chance to interact with socially, like, it's all the better, because I think it just makes our conversation easier and more inviting and inclusive, so and fun. So thanks so much for agreeing to be on this chat with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk to students about these ideas of wellness and holistic wellness. I think as musicians and as vocalists specifically, but any musician, you all know by nature what I'm going to be talking about with regards to holistic wellness, mindfulness, and then self-compassion might be a little bit of a new idea, but this is trying to wrap into what you already intuitively do as a musician when you work with your body to get to an end result. I find that musicians tend to be very attuned to what's going on in their body because they have to. You know, your body, whether you're playing an instrument or your voice is your instrument, your body is part of your instrument and part of your process. And so what we're going to talk about a bit today is getting in tune with our bodies, being aware of what's going on with our bodies, particularly in moments of stress, and then work, and then have a way to kind of maybe soften our approach to a difficult situation or approach to stress. I'll just say a little echo to my bio just to let the audience know that I've worked with artists and musicians for several years now. I am a psychologist, so I am not a musician or an artist professionally. That I save for my personal life, and I've loved music and art in many different ways. But I have worked with musicians and artists for several years now, and I've learned that there are some similarities that most musicians and artists share, and that is a very heavy self-critic. Most artists, most musicians walk around with a self-critic, perform with a self-critic, practice with a self-critic who's always telling them that you can be better, you can do better, you're never good enough. That everyone out there has something special, but you don't have that, so work harder or do more or suffer because you deserve to suffer because you're not good enough. And that's something that most musicians and artists just have in common, unfortunately. But it makes a lot of sense knowing I've worked at Eastman, I've worked at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is a prestigious art school. I know that the environments you all are trained in, especially at these higher levels, often facilitate that. I mean, the literal word that artists go through when they receive feedback is critique. You go to critique. And so that, I think, just fuels that inner self-critic that we all have and just feeds the machine. So in what I'm going to talk about with self-compassion, the title in my presentation, which I forget, but it's the 3 C's that I've been living by throughout this own pandemic is creativity, compassion, and community. And I don't think I included community or connection. When I was kind of starting to work through this pandemic, I've been working from home for, who knows, 5-6 weeks now. I wanted something to give myself to like what is important to me in this time. What do I need to keep myself motivated, to keep myself moving forward? And these 3 things of creativity, compassion, and connection came from my work working with students, working with art and musician students, of what seems to be important in just fueling everyone in moving forward. And it's something that most musicians intuitively believe in, the power of creativity, the power of creativity and music to facilitate connection. Most musicians get into this field because there's a dream and a passion around that. And so I wanted to keep that moving forward for me, even as I'm in my our social distancing, or as someone in my professional circle flipped it around and said, well, we're actually doing safe relating. We don't want to facilitate social distancing. We're doing physical distancing so that we can safely relate to one another. And so in saying that, I want to talk about how self-compassion is a way that we can start safely relating to ourselves. And I found this beautiful quote from another colleague that said that safety, when it comes down to it, when we think of the word safety and what it means, we can start with a very simple definition of the freedom to take many breaths, to take as many breaths as you need. And so that's what I want to offer here during our time together, during our discussion, is When I use this word safety, all I really mean is just what would it mean to give yourself some space to breathe, to take as many breaths as you need before you move forward. So this idea of self-compassion, and normally if this were a conversation, I jump in and say, okay, who has questions or to start us off? And I invite that, shoot a chat to Eric or raise your hand. I'm cool with being interrupted. I'm normally not the one to speak. I'm normally the one listening. So I love the conversational aspect of things.
Well, Stacy,
Yes.
I'll interrupt. I'm perfectly comfortable doing that. As I was listening to you, I heard two of the things that we have to be wary of are things that I think contribute to the success of musicians. That inner critic, that running analysis is integral to efficient practice. We have to assess what's suboptimal and inefficient, and we have to diagnose those things and find the errors or the inefficiencies, the suboptimal performance, and then correct them. So I think that running monologue of self-criticism, not only is it prevalent among musicians, but I think in a lot of ways it's necessary. And so I think we have to kind of walk that line of where are we objectively assessing what we're doing in our practice so that we can improve, and when does that tip too far and become a running criticism of ourselves as people or as artists or as communicators, right? And the other thing I heard was that, performances are inherently unsafe, right? There is a feeling of we lose that sense of safety a little bit when we're in a performance setting, and a lot of musicians and performers kind of thrive on that adrenaline rush, and it's that kind of that heightened state that they get addicted to in performance. And so two things I think that you mentioned already that I think are really big parts of musician and performer lifestyles that we have to really be wary of how much it's influencing the rest of our life, right?
Sure, and Eric, I'm so glad you pointed that out, because it's a common, and this is why I love working with artists and musicians, because you guys are already so aware of how you hold your inner critic and what function that plays and why you feed it. I would say this because, and I'm so glad that we're talking to students tonight, and NATS, as I understand it, is teachers, right? So many people in this conversation are going to have some experience being a teacher. And so I would invite you to start thinking about your inner critic as your inner teacher, because so many musicians are much more kind, compassionate, and informative to their students than they are to themselves.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I love that. I have a couple of teachers in my past that maybe I wouldn't want their voice in my brains right now, but most of them a really welcoming, comforting thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely. And that's why I would argue that it's important to facilitate self-compassion and your own compassionate inner teacher, because often the folks who are critical of us are critical of themselves. And there's this theory, and it's been shown in the research, that if you can be compassionate to yourself, you are much more likely to offer compassion to others. I'll give the example of the difficult student. If any teacher has worked for any amount of time, they know who the difficult student is. And often the difficult student doesn't respond to, hey, you idiot, pay attention, or hey, you suck, you just suck, get out of my classroom. Sometimes we have to do that, but that doesn't actually facilitate learning or showing up or performing. And with regards to the performance space, there's actually some literature out there that I've read. Vanessa Cornett, if any of you know Vanessa Cornett, is a music teacher. She wrote a book recently called The Mindful Musician. She talks about the difference between practice and performance, and how in practice that inner critic is very necessary, because that's what practice is about, and you're paying attention and you're trying to correct or critique or play through things differently or find the way. But in the performance, that's the time just to go. That's the time you just are there, you're present. It doesn't matter anymore if you need to fix something because it's pedal to the metal, you're just going. And so in the performance space, I would, again, that safety, that freedom to take breaths is letting yourself breathe with, this is what I have to offer right now. I can't fix it because I'm offering it as I'm thinking this thought.
Yes.
And so that's thank you for bringing those points up, because those are definitely two areas where the adrenaline that you feel when you're performing is excellent. It's there to get you to do your best, and when you're performing, you don't have to, when you're performing and you're critiquing at the same time, there's often a little staggering, which doesn't make for peak performance.
For sure. No, and I think you're right. The goal is to automate those behaviors, the optimal behaviors, right? So that we don't have to be intentional necessarily most of the time about them. We are automate them. We're training our body so that that's the response in those stressful situations, right? So that we can free our minds to communicate. And I think you're exactly right. We already have one question, and I think it's a really good one just for some context.
Yeah.
Before we dig into to some of the nuts and bolts of our topic today. We want to ask you what a normal day at work with artists looked like before this quarantine and isolation. This particular person's a student at a smaller university, and they're not familiar with having a psychologist and a counselor connecting with music students and arts students so closely in a position like this. So can you talk a little bit about like what a normal day was like before all this started?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's my first year at Utah State University, and so my normal day for this past year has been figuring out what a normal day should look like.
Right.
I'm the first psychologist actually hired by the King College of the Arts, and I'm very excited to be here. And it's been a great journey. So many thoughts. But a normal day, I am a psychologist, and I do work at the College Counseling Center, so that's where my office is, and that's where students come to me. So my typical day is seeing students for individual sessions. And the King College of the Arts is the music, of course, but it's also fine arts and theater. So I work with all students from King College of the Arts, as well as I have some other duties as a CAPS clinician, counseling and psychological services clinician, that are kind of outside the King College of the Arts. My specific duties working with the King College of the Arts are I attend the monthly leadership meetings. So I'm really fortunate that the dean of the college and the college leadership, the department heads, want a psychologist at the table. I don't often know quite figuring it out. I've been in this like process of figuring out what my role is, but I've been welcomed into the conversations at the larger kind of systems level. I get to do outreaches like this with students. Before COVID, it was in person, and I would be facilitating these conversations. Gosh, this is not actually part of my official description, but something I love about working with CCA is I get to go to concerts. I get to go to music concerts and art gallery shows and things like that. And even though that's not, like I said, not part of my work day, I've this past year intentionally made it a practice pre-COVID to at least hit one a week in one of those areas, so that I'm seeing what students are doing and what they're passionate about, like what the culture of CCA is passionate about. And so that's been things, meeting with professors like Dr. Hood, who want to know how to support their students, and of course I don't talk about students specifically because my role as a counselor is confidential, but just talking about general ideas of how can we facilitate student wellness.
Yeah, and I'll say, Stacy, a few of my private voice students have confided in me that they've worked with you, and in every instance, the feedback is that they're so happy to talk to someone who understands the unique pressures of artists and musicians and students in those fields. And one thing that I think people outside the arts have trouble understanding when you're an arts major is that you're in class all day, and then when everyone else is doing fun stuff, right,
right?
we're practicing and rehearsing or doing studio time if you're a visual artist, right? And
Mhm.
so our everyone else's leisure time is our work time also, and just the hours and so and the pressures on art students are just immense. And having someone to who understands that so thoroughly, I know personally, I know for a fact that the students are appreciative of that. So thanks for kind of explaining what
Yeah,
a little more about your role at USU and the King College of the Arts is. I think that helps give some context to people watching
definitely.
where you're coming from when you talk about this. So thank you, and thanks for that question. Great.
No.
So yeah, tell us a little more
All right.
before
Yeah.
I
So,
interview.
so this like yeah, and I'll jump off kind of that like this the unique pressures that music. Well, I'll try and use the word musicians. I'm so used to talking in the larger college context of musicians, artists, and actors. So I'll try and remember I'm in the music realm right now.
You know
But
what? The fact that you're calling the singers musicians is great. A lot of times you'll hear people say, "Oh, the musicians and singers," and we're like, "We're musicians too." So I'll take the label of musicians or artists. I think we're great.
okay, awesome. Yeah. So excuse me, I'm getting so excited here. I love talking about this stuff. This is my dream job. When I was, because my background is in theater and music myself, and so when I got to combine my younger self with my professional self, this is like, yeah, my dream job. But anyway, jumping off into talking about like those unique pressures that musicians face. I definitely agree that, you know, you all go to class like normal students, but then you have rehearsals for performances, you have your private lessons, you have your own time in the practice room, and then you have to go home and do homework for those normal classes. And so why I really think self-compassion is a beneficial tool for students, for music students especially, is because often I get pushback when I talk about self-care. Who has time for that is often what I hear. And I hear you. You all are working so hard. But there's so much in the research about self-care is not about necessarily what we do or giving yourself time for a bubble bath, for example. It's about how you do what you're doing and how you engage the work. And are you viewing what you're doing in a way that can facilitate longevity, or are you doing what you're doing in a way that's pushing you to the brink of burnout? And as someone who has had, personally, I've experienced burnout, I definitely have the experiential knowledge of the difference of how I talk to myself when I'm burning out and how I talk to myself when I'm doing well. Because when I'm doing well, I can normally sit with myself and say, okay, I'm okay. Like, yeah, it's not perfect, but I'm generally okay. And when I'm not doing well, historically, I'm a recovering perfectionist. I'll just disclose that now. Perfectionism is like a drug. It fuels itself, and the addiction to continue to perfection. You never quite achieve that same high. You're just always striving for it. Is my analogy. It creates some pretty harsh self-criticism, that you're never good enough. And so this idea of self-compassion, very simply put, is how would you treat trying to treat yourself the way you would treat a friend who is having a very similar difficult time. So I want you to think of not just any friend or that friend that you rag on, because we all have that friend that you are sarcastic with and you don't actually, you say horrible things to them, but you don't mean the horrible things. Don't think about that friend. Think about someone you care about and who, when they're having a hard time, you soften towards them or you approach them with kindness. And this doesn't have to be a person, because sometimes people are hard to be kind to. This can be a pet. This can be an animal. This can be even thinking about just anything that softens you and your approach. It can be even a beautiful piece of music, and how would you approach that just to listen as opposed to perform. So even if you're thinking about that good friend, or you know that little puppy dog that just totally chewed your shoe up, we might, if your friend blew something, if your friend just totally like bombed a performance and you were there and you saw it and you cringed with your friend as they were bombing it, what would you say to them? You would probably be honest if you were a good friend, but you probably wouldn't be harsh. You might say, yeah, that was rough. And like, hey, it's all right. We'll get back up on that horse. Like, hey, I'm here for you. Like, can we talk? Do you want to just sit? Like, I'm here for you. It's probably really different than you treat yourself when you've bombed a performance or bombed even something like a practice, bombed a test. And so how this idea of self-compassion, it's not lying to yourself and just putting on those rose-colored glasses and thinking everything's fine all the time. I don't have to improve because I'm perfect. It's not about that. It's about honesty, but it's also about kindness and finding it within yourself and practicing treating yourself the way you would treat a good friend. So I'll jump into kind of breaking down this idea of self-compassion, but is there any thoughts or any questions that come up even just with that short definition?
Well, I'll share a little, and then I'll invite people who are attending to jump in and share their thoughts or questions too. My first year in my position at Utah State, I gave a faculty recital, and I was really excited and eager to do it. I was collaborating with the top choir there. We did the Vaughan Williams 5 mystical songs. I did a whole program of early 20th century British song, which is supposed to be my area of expertise, and at my recital, it was fine, but it just wasn't what I hoped I would give. And I am your target audience for this, by the way, your talk today, because I do not talk to myself the way I talk to my students or my friends. And I have one response when people give me praise after performances like that, a mental response. It's not very kind to myself. But I do remember my boss, my boss and mentor here at Utah State, Cindy, came to me and said, man, it's just so tough switching from performer life to teacher life and balancing those things. And I thought you did a pretty admirable job. And I was like, that is what great complimentary feedback that also acknowledges the struggle, right? And I don't remember the 100 people who said something kind afterwards. I don't remember what they said specifically, but I remember that because it was conscientious, and it was honest and genuine and complimentary, but also acknowledged the struggle.
Yes.
And I think that sticks with me. And so I think that's the kind of feedback we need to be giving ourselves, it sounds like, a little bit. I wonder if anyone else wants to jump in. Do they have thoughts, questions? My list of people is over here. I'm not just looking off to the side for no reason. Do we have anyone who wants to share questions, comments, concerns? Not at this time, Stacy.
Okay, well, thank you, Eric. Yeah, because I like what was modeled there is that honesty and acknowledgement. And so I'll jump in and talk about kind of the 3 core elements of self-compassion. And the first is mindfulness. And mindfulness is not overthinking, which it often gets confused with. There's often very thoughtful people who are like, I'm just mindful of everything. It's a little different. Mindfulness is paying attention to what's going on without judging it, without jumping into problem solving mode or figuring it out mode, and just noticing what is there. Rumination often narrows our focus and exaggerates our experience. When we overthink, it kind of blows everything out of proportion. And then the other extreme is, right, avoidance, which we're just like, I'm not going to think about it, going to procrastinate a bit. But that kind of rumination, that other extreme of it focuses on that I am a mistake rather than I made a mistake, which are often so easy to conflate, especially for perfectionists, which a lot of musicians are. And so when we can mindfully observe what's going on, and especially in difficult situations, and bringing this back to COVID, I mean, we're all in really difficult situations right now where we have had to readjust the way we do life in so many different ways, readjust the way we do work. I am not not used to relating to a computer screen. I'm used to relating to human beings in front of me where I can see like all their body language and what they're doing. And it's difficult to have to be on a screen to interact with people on a screen, and it's definitely different. Doable, like we're figuring it out, but it's hard, and it's not ideal. And so when we can mindfully be aware of that struggle, being present with ourselves without judging it or just being harsh about it, we get to be connected with reality in a different way, in a more realistic way, actually. And so we can offer ourselves that realistic nature of, hey, this is hard right now, rather than things like, I must be a loser for finding this really hard right now. I must suck because I'm struggling. Or this is hard and it will never be better and I'm just going to struggle for the rest of my life. Mindfulness is just right now. What's going on right now? And acknowledging it in a real way.
Mm-hmm.
And this connects to the second part of self-compassion, which is common humanity. And this is sometimes really hard for artists and musicians to connect with, because so often there's this idea that if you want to be a successful musician, you have to go above and beyond. You have to be above average, somehow perfect. But if all musicians are above average, that's just not mathematically possible. I took statistics in graduate school. You can't have everyone be above average. It's okay to have a shared sense of struggle. And I actually think one of the benefits of COVID and this whole pandemic right now is that we are all suffering together. We're all in it. We may have different degrees of suffering, different flavors of suffering, but this is all hard. And I would encourage, and this is a process, but just start wrestling with this idea that we are all works in progress. No matter what you're working through, no matter where you are in your career, you're a work in progress. You're not ever gonna land, because if you land, you're probably missing something, right? And we are all gonna fail and make mistakes. I know what it's like to have a bad day. We all have bad days. And I think one way we kind of disconnect from reality is that we assume things should go well. We assume if we're struggling, something is wrong. But struggling is a part of life. And I work with so many people. I've worked with so many artists and musicians. And I can tell you, I can promise you, that musician or artist that you're like thinking has it all, they have struggles too.
Yes.
And so that's part of what we're connected through that. And when we are present with that, when we're aware of that, we're not so worried about comparing ourselves to others as like, you're better, I'm worse, I'm better, you're worse. We're connecting. We're saying, all right, you're struggling, I'm struggling. And again, flavors and degrees and what that looks like is going to be unique because we're all different. But we're connected in that. We all share that.
Yeah, Stacy, I'm reminded when you suggested when we were discussing the topic, and you sent the TED Talk kind of on the topic, that I remember that was the first thing I reacted to in the talk. Was she said, if you told me that I did a perfectly average job on this TED Talk, I would be devastated. And we all think that, I think, if one of my students left my lesson and they were like, hey, Dr. Hood, just really average lesson, I would be devastated, And so I think this idea that average is bad, and that every single person should be above average, that we hold ourselves to that at all times. It's literally an impossible standard, right? So I think it's so smart that you, and we are reminded of that, especially when we're voice teaching. It's especially applicable to us, because those inefficiencies, those imperfections are opportunities to grow, right? If we're not having them pointed out in a voice lesson, if we're not addressing them, then we are wasting our time and money in the lesson, right? So we have to accept that, you know, that suboptimal behavior is a part of the learning process. We can't get better without it, and we punish ourselves for it, you know. Anyway,
And
I
it's
see
so
that.
interesting that you phrase it as suboptimal. It's even so hard to just say average, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like that average okayness,
Mm-hmm.
general okayness. And because I can tell you, I've had vocal coaching, and I I would not have learned anything if my teacher was like, you're brilliant. You're brilliant all the time. I mean, it was nice every now and then to have her remind me that I do have some talent, and I would have learned nothing had I not had those struggles worked with and been present with. I also would have learned nothing if she just totally ridiculed me for those struggles, because I'm a tender heart. I'll acknowledge that. So I wilt under harsh criticism. But we all need that encouragement. And so the self-compassion is, again, those things that you'll offer your students, again, not just bullshitting them, sorry, but being honest with what they're doing, but in a kind way, in a way that shows like, hey, it's all right to struggle. This is what we're here to do. We're here to be with you in struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the third component of self-compassion is self-kindness. So rather than being harshly critical, noticing personal shortcomings, like magnifying those shortcomings, being supportive, being encouraging. Often the self-critic, and this is another conversation, but just to touch on it, the self-critic is often there because at some point it was a form of self-protection. And for artists and musicians, often that self-protection is, if I can say the worst thing about myself repeatedly, then it won't hurt if I get criticism from others. What actually then happens, and we'll talk a little bit about this next, is we're activating our stress response system, our fight or flight system, and we're doing that chronically, rather than what it was evolutionarily evolved to do is fight or flight, get you out of the dangerous situation, and then calm back down to our kind of resting state. That self-critic perpetuates fight or flight, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So again, self-kindness, I cannot say this enough. It's not about rose-colored glasses or a Pollyanna-ish approach that everything's wonderful, nothing's ever wrong. And it doesn't even mean like I have to like what's going on. Acceptance does not mean I love this right now. I do not love doing my work from home. But this is what's going on. This is the situation that we're in. This is the situation I'm in, and that's okay. It's okay that this is not completely okay.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask a question about one of those three core concepts?
Absolutely.
Maybe you'll address it a little later, and in that case, you can just tell me to be patient. But is there a way that are there tools that we can work to develop to recognize if we're in that sweet spot of mindfulness, to help keep us from swinging too far on the pendulum towards avoidance, or swinging too far on the pendulum toward overthinking? Is there a way to know that we're in that sweet spot?
I would say, and this is why as musicians, you already have the core components of how to do this, is what are your five senses telling you? Hmm. And again, not just running through boom, 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 but and especially as vocalists, like as singers, you guys actually are so aware of where your voices are at, where your bodies are at, what gets a certain sound. And so just even noticing. So I would say that is a way to just practice it. And again, minds wander. That's okay. Minds do wander. Our minds are built to wander. They're built to be curious, and that curiosity is a beautiful thing. And when we're being mindful, it's almost like if you have kids, or again, I love the pet metaphors, like a little puppy dog. It's not like, hey, be here now. You're fucking up by not being here. Okay, I'm sorry. You're messing up by not being here now. it's, oh no, come back here. Like, hey, like I know you want to go do that thing, but right now we're doing this thing. And so come back here. Or like, all right, like, okay, well, saw you wandered off there. It's all right. Just come back.
Right.
This is what we're doing now. Because that mindfulness, again, it's not like a all the time thing. And there's a whole neuroscience study research of the different ways our minds work and why our brains need to work in those different ways throughout the day. But mindfulness is kind of just, what are my five senses telling me right now? And even tuning in inwards, just,
Yeah.
and it's that noticing without judging or expecting it to be different.
Yes. Oh, I love the way you said that. I think I do this in my teaching, and I'm sure many of us do, is I'll invite the student to share what they noticed from their sound. I have them sing a passage and, just what did you notice? What did you observe? And invariably, the first thing is, well, I didn't do a great job of blank, right?
Right.
And the response is critical feedback instead of just objective, what did I hear? What did I feel? What did I see in the mirror? What was I able to observe tactily? And the sooner I find the sooner we can start to get rid of that judgmental language when we're observing what we do when we sing, actually the more efficient our work can be, because there's no value judgment associated with any observation, right? So that's great. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And that in that example, it's the value judgment in that case is an assumption. It's an assumption of an expectations, which, we all know what an assumption makes out of you and me. And
Yeah.
so when we're just mindful and aware, we have a lot more data to work with. We don't have to limit our scope to a certain sliver. We've got so much more to work with.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit about the physiology of self-compassion and self-criticism, and I kind of already started talking about that. So when we criticize ourselves, we react the same way if that criticism came from outside of us. Our bodies, our hearts, our threat response system just doesn't know the difference. So if someone came up to you and started screaming at you about how horrible you are or what you did, you would go into fight or flight mode. Fight meaning like, gotta take out the threat. Flight meaning run away. And then the third one, often not talked about, is freeze. And that's kind of that deer in the headlights where you're just frozen in fear and you can't do anything. And so if maybe I don't move, the threat will stop.
Right.
So that's a healthy response when people come to me and say, hey, I want to get rid of my anxiety. I'm like, well, we don't want to get rid of it entirely, because if we did, you'd be a bump on a log. We want some stress response, but we want to help you manage it. So to that point, self-criticism, it gets our threat response system up the same way. And chronic stress is often related to chronic self-criticism in some form or another. So I'm not going to go, I have notes here on all kind of the brain anatomy of that, but I want to respect our time and talk really about kind of the core, the heart of this, is that often in brass tacks kind of terms, that threat response system is something we share with all animals, including reptiles, right? So reptiles react kind of in that fight or flight, run away, freeze kind of response. But we're not just reptiles. We don't just have those stress hormones that get activated. We also, and we need them because, again, self-protection is key, right? We want to keep ourselves safe. But the problem is with the self-critic, you are both the attacker and the attacked. And that is a nasty, vicious cycle. Self-compassion, with that common humanity piece, taps into our mammalian brains. Mammals are different than reptiles in that they create social bonds, social connection, and that social connection provides a sense of safety, a sense of space, a sense of you're okay. And again, not you're perfect, you're okay. And so that chronic stress that comes with fight or flight and chronic criticism, self-criticism, what self-compassion can do is it's the antidote to that. It's reminding ourselves not to be stressing and thinking about, okay, where can I run? What can I do? How can I fix this problem? It's bringing us to the present of just noticing what's around, being curious, like, It's reminding us that we're not alone. When you're struggling, you're not the worst person in the world. You're a person. Welcome to the human race. This is the thing we share. We struggle in our endeavors, and we can do that together. You're not alone in this. And then that kindness piece is treating ourselves like we would treat a friend, offering ourselves that realistic but very kind feedback of, this is hard and it's all right. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And that also impacts our physiology. Just like there are the stress hormones, there are also the good hormones. There's oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, right? It's the one that we feel when we're connecting with someone we love or building connections. There's the endorphins, right? Those feel-good hormones, those can come when we're activating not our threat response system, but our care system. And when we're activating our care system, stress reduces, right? And our feelings of safety and security allow us to then go and try new things. And try them in a safe way. Again, as teachers and as music teachers, you all are very aware of the difference of offering really harsh criticism that can shut someone down. And we've all done that accidentally, or when we're not in our best teacher modes, and we can have compassion for ourselves in that as well. And we can see when students flourish, when they have that space to play, to kind of find out what works for them, and then bam, they hit it. So I want to, just welcome any thoughts or feedback. I do, Eric, you asked about practices, ways that we can help ourselves find that sweet spot. And there are some practices. I was going to lead us in a practice. It takes about 5 minutes, but I can also send links out for recordings of those practices that can be really helpful. So we can kind of decide, would it be better to do a practice or to have some conversation?
Well, maybe the best thing to do would be, we've got around 10 minutes left. Maybe we can entertain a couple questions, and if we're at a good spot, maybe that would be a good way to send us away from our chat today.
Sure.
Cool. So, we have a question. Let's check this out. Okay. As musicians, we tend to experience our emotions on the extreme ends of the spectrum. And these emotions are important as we use them later theatrically. So how do we protect ourselves from emotional exhaustion? I feel like I'm sometimes unable to practice self-compassion because I'm emotionally exhausted. But yeah, I think the idea is that performers, maybe even more so than the average person, we feel our feelings in the extreme. And I think some people are reticent to shut that out. Not that you're suggesting we don't feel our feelings, but it's so exhausting to feel so intensely, and because we use those feelings in our performance. And so I think this person is saying that they have trouble practicing that because they feel they're emotionally exhausted when they come around, when they make time to do it. Do you have any feedback for that person?
Yeah, because I would ask yourself, like, when you practice a new skill, do you do it when you're exhausted? And that's a dumb question, I know, because everyone's like, no, you don't. When we practice these skills, and I'm not saying you are gonna be able to just like, bam, switch from your self-critic to your self-compassion mind like that. I can honestly say I've been on a 10-year journey to get to a point where I was a very, very harsh self-critic and dealt with my own extreme emotions of anxiety and depression and pretty severely, to get to a point where I have my self-critic. She's still there. She likes to sit on my shoulder every now and then. And I have another voice in my head that can say, hey, take a minute, like, I know you're feeling upset and you're scared, and I recognize, that self-critic, those harsh voices often wanna protect us from something. It's actually really useful to sit down and think about, okay, I'm beating myself up. What is this getting me? If I keep beating myself up, what am I protecting myself from, or what am I achieving? And again, we all do it. Like that self-critic, we all do it. And with that emotional exhaustion piece, I would say be kind to yourself. Yes, as performers, and especially as people who are drawn to the arts, to the performance arts, that's what you got. You've got your deal, your unique set of ways you feel the world. And I can promise you, we've all had those moments when we felt really extreme feelings, maybe differently, maybe a different flavor, and have felt exhausted. And that's part what I would offer as part of your common humanity. And again, unique flavor. And thank goodness we have performers and folks who can show us the depths of emotion in these beautifully creative ways.
Yeah.
And practice being kind to yourself maybe when you're not exhausted. Because when you're exhausted, I was talking to Eric before we jumped on and just talking about wanting those skills, maybe we talked about this during, like you automate your skills so that when you're performing, they're there for you.
Yeah.
Self-compassion is the same way. It takes time to build because it can feel a little unintuitive at first or for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep showing up. And when you show up, you find that the skill set may then be there for you when you're in a difficult time.
Do you think it'd be beneficial to try to like schedule some time earlier in the day to do this kind of thing, or does that feel too binding? Or
well, so the practice that I offer, and so the practices that I will offer and things that I think can be good for mindfulness and practicing mindfulness and self-compassion are on the kind of meditation realm, the mindful meditation realm, or just mindful awareness realm. And I think, if you practice, I've learned not to tell artists and musicians when to practice because y'all do your own thing at your own hour. And some people are like, I get up at 5 a.m. and I'm in the practice room because that's my sweet hour. And others are like, yes, and I'm there at 2 a.m. and that's my sweet hour. Mm-hmm. So you practice when you know is a good time for you. Some people like to do it before bed because that's a good time to practice de-stressing so you can put your mind to rest. I've found different benefits of doing it in the morning versus the evening. So yeah, it can be
so
beneficial.
Just kind of listen to yourself, and if you know you tend to be emotionally exhausted by the end of the day, then maybe make time for it the way you make time for any other skill you're practicing, would you say?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, maybe I should do it more in the morning when I have been just staring horrified at the news when I start my day. Maybe that'd be a good time to do this instead.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. I mean, again, and if we have time, I would like to kind of offer you a brief meditation because I think that highlights how you can practice this. And then, are we at a dead, we must end at 8 on the dot kind of deal?
No.
Or 10? Okay. So if I bleed over a minute or two, we're good. Okay. All right. And then for those of you who must leave at that time, feel free to leave. And yeah, do your thing. Like there's no requirement. So
cool. Well, yeah, I think I think might be a good time to if you're willing to share that exercise with us, maybe we can try that now.
Yeah, definitely. So this is what's called a mindful self-compassion exercise, and I'm going to offer you some things. Again, everything is an invitation, nothing is a requirement. And if you're just not needing this right now, feel free to sit back and you don't have to participate. Just choose to join as you will. So I would invite you to get into a posture that I like to call upright, but not uptight. So if you're sitting, kind of finding a soft seat where it's comfortable, you can lean back. Feet on the floor, you can have your feet tucked up, whatever is kind of comfortable, and just kind of be aware of where you're at. And then you can choose to either close your eyes if that feels safe or comfortable for you, or put your eyes at half mast, or even just soften your gaze and kind of keep your eyes open but out of focus. And just notice your breath, notice where you are. You don't have to change anything, but just start to take notice of your body in space right now against the chair. And bring your attention to your breath. And as you're aware of your breath, I invite you to think of a situation in your life right now that's causing you stress. Could be a health problem, a relationship problem, a work or school problem, or some other struggle. And since we're early on in practicing self-compassion, I invite you to pick a problem that's probably a 3 or a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. So nothing overwhelming, nothing very large or scary, but just something that causes a little distress. So now I invite you to visualize that situation clearly in your mind's eye. What is the setting? Who is saying what to whom? What's happening? What might happen? And notice the discomfort in your body as you bring this difficult situation to mind. Notice any tension, any discomfort that arises. Be aware of it. And now try saying to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. We're reminding ourselves to be mindful, to pay attention to the discomfort without judging it. And suffering doesn't have to be the word you use. Some people prefer struggle, or even some other less formal words saying, this hurts. Ouch. This sucks right now. And whatever phrase you use, you're acknowledging the pain. Now try saying to yourself, suffering is a part of life. We're reminding ourselves of our common humanity, reminding ourselves that we're not alone. And you can try saying that to yourself as well. I'm not alone. Everyone experiences this in their own way, with their own suffering. But everyone experiences this at some point. And this is how it feels when people struggle in this way. And then this is the third component. And I offer you to offer yourself what we call a soothing touch. This can be as simple as holding your own hand, and just gently clasping your hand in your lap. You can put a hand over your heart, offering yourself some soothing pressure. Whatever feels right or comfortable to you, rubbing your legs or holding your knees. And now try saying to yourself, may I be kind to myself, or even, may I give myself what I need. There might be some unique words that you want to offer yourself that feel more comfortable to you. May I accept myself just as I am, or even, may I intend to accept myself just as I am. May I forgive myself. May I be strong. And if you're having difficulty finding the right words, imagine a dear friend or a loved one who is having the same problem as you. What would you say to this person? What would you deliver to your friend in a heart-to-heart? And now see if you can offer yourself that same message. So now releasing the practice, releasing this time, You can open your eyes if they were closed and come back to this space in a pace that's comfortable for you. So this, I recognize our time and I want to respect it. And if you want to stick around, I welcome you to share your experience or your thoughts, what you found useful, what was difficult, or any reflections that you might have.
Well, if those who are with us are putting their thoughts together and they want to share that, just while they're doing that, I'll just thank you for taking us through that. And I think most of us, especially those of us who are voice teachers, pride ourselves on being, um, compassionately honest with our students.
Mm-hmm.
And we can bring that same intentionality and the same sense of being conscientious and compassionately honest with ourselves and be kind to ourselves the way we are with our students, then, I think that will do a lot to help help our mental health and to help our ability to process all of these new and unique challenges we're facing in the environment we're in. And so I appreciate you sharing that with us. So I don't see any people sharing at the moment, but I'm sure that they're all processing this on their own. And
Sure.
for those of you who are watching after the fact, I hope you had a great experience taking yourself through that. And if you're anything like me, I will probably bookmark this and timestamp it, and that way I can have Stacy take me through at a later time and process that later too. So Stacy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yes, and
Appreciate
thank
it.
you again for inviting me. I've really enjoyed my time with you all, and I hope something, if not everything, but just take something away and chew on it for a while.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for those of you who joined us live. Like I said, the NATS chats are monthly and they've been more than monthly lately. They've been covering a wide range of topics. And if you came here because you're struggling with dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and you want help and guidance as a singer and a voice teacher on how to cope with that, how to approach it, there was a great NATS chat offered just yesterday that you can check out in the archives. And there's also been several NATS chats on the more logistical, technological struggles we're all dealing with also. So check those out. These chats are a great resource, and we're so thankful to NATS for sponsoring them. And thank you again for participating live. And if you're watching after the fact, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and to share this experience with us. And as I said, if you have ideas for future topics or other questions that you'd like to ask Stacy at a later time, I could probably forward those on. So you have my email address. So feel free to send those to me. Thank you again for participating, and thanks to our guest. We're so grateful for having you with us. So check out the NATS chats, and our SNATS chats will be back in the fall. So watch out for announcements on topics for that. So thank you again, Stacy. Thank you, all of you, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Stay well.